Shane Bowen is out as defensive coordinator for the New York Giants, and things have gotten rather interesting following that move. That and more coming up next here on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, now the number one sports podcast network. My name is Patricia Traina, credentialed member of the New York Giants media for Locked On, as well as for New York Giants on SI, which is where you can find all of my written work. And as always, welcome on into the Blue Crew community members, the everydayers, the newcomers, and everybody in between. Thanks so much for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. All right, Giant fans, we've got a lot of things to cover today because it finally happened. Defensive coordinator Shane Bowen was relieved of his duties by interim head coach Mike Kafka. The Giants naming outside linebackers coach Charlie Bullen as the interim defensive coordinator. So we're going to take a look at what led up to the Bowen situation, why it happened now, and then we'll take a look at Charlie Bullen, what we can expect, and why I have some concerns about this particular move. And then in segment 3, we'll take a look at now what, as far as where the Giants go from here, not just, for the rest of the season, but for next season and beyond. And again, I've got a concern that I'm going to have to get off my chest, which maybe is no big deal, or maybe you'll agree with me it's a concern, but that's what we're going to cover on today's program. So again, welcome on into everybody. All right, so here it is, folks. Shane Bowen is out as defensive coordinator. If you've been following the show, if you're an everydayer, you know that I have called for this several times. It just couldn't be allowed to continue. And after 5 instances in which the Giants defense failed to protect at least a 10-point lead going in late into the game, it was time. I mean, quite frankly, folks, it should have been time a long time ago. Should have gone back to Denver when that historic come-from-behind win by the Broncos came forward. But different coach at the time, Brian Daboll, was there. Brian Daboll maybe, I don't know, looking to hang on to things so that there was a buffer around him, if you will. But anyway, Kafka made the decision. So let's talk about the decision, why it was made, besides the obvious, and the timing of why it was made. So you've got the 5 blown leads that I mentioned, which, by the way, are tied for most in the NFL in a single season, all right, which is not a good stat you want to be tied for. The run defense, this was supposedly a strength Bowen brought with him from Tennessee. And one of the big concerns I always had about him was how much of the success he had in Tennessee was a result of his doing versus that of Mike Vrabel's doing. Mike Vrabel, of course, being a defensive-minded head coach. And I think now we probably have our answers. So why did the Giants make this move right now? Why not 2 weeks ago when Brian Daboll was fired? Why not wait until the bye week? Why not do it back in Denver? All right, let's take each situation as it comes. So the reason why it wasn't done after Denver, despite that historically bad loss to the Broncos, is, they thought, okay, just one of those freaky things, and we'll just continue, we'll fix it, and we'll move forward and whatnot. But, I can't help but wonder, the reason why I think Brian Daboll went to Jackson Dart as early as he did was to save his job. And sometimes when you're in survival mode, you tend to do things or not do things that maybe the opposite would be better off if you had done it. So they kept Shane Bowen on. They kept hoping that he would figure out a way to fix things. That didn't happen. Daboll got fired. So in comes Mike Kafka. And last week against the Packers, more of the same thing. The defense just totally collapsing, the run defense looking terrible, not getting the results from the talent that they have. So everybody's like, okay, well, why didn't he fire Bowen then? And the reason for that is he wanted to get a better feel for how the defense was being run, how the defensive coaching was going, how the game plan was coming together. This was all stuff that he wasn't able to gather in his role as offensive coordinator / assistant head coach. So having had that opportunity now for 2 weeks to kind of get a feel for how things were running with the defensive staff meetings and whatnot, Kafka obviously, took that information. He probably took some information from his mentor and good friend, Pat Fitzgerald, who was a guest of Kafka's for a couple practices last week. And of course, his own observations, and decided, okay, you know what? We're going to make the move. So why make it now, especially when there's one more game before the bye week? Well, as Kafka explained on his call with reporters on Monday morning, they have a Monday night game. So they've got an extra day to kind of get everything together, build up a game plan, and just kind of settle in following the shakeup. And the shakeup, folks, quite frankly, long overdue. I thought it should have been done at the end of last season, but the Giants decided to stay with him. The decision is made by the head coach. And, Kafka talked about how he had a conversation with general manager Joe Shane about it, and they discussed everything. But ultimately, Kafka said it was his decision to move on from Shane Bowen. So Shane Bowen, as I've said so many times before on the show, Shane Bowen's a really nice guy. All right. You won't find a better gentleman than him. And maybe he's a good, position coach. Maybe that's his limit. But as a defensive coordinator, just a lot of head scratching decisions, just a lot. And ultimately, the more it went on, the more it was evident that he just wasn't getting the most out of what he was given. And I know some of you will disagree with me when I say this, but this defense was a lot more talented than what they showed. And who knows, maybe now moving forward, they'll be put in better positions to be more productive. They'll be more cohesive. There'll be less hiccups, if you will, in, say, the run defense. I don't know. It's kind of late in the year. And of course, we'll talk about in the next segment some of the changes that we can expect and whatnot. But the bottom line, folks, is that the move was made. And it's unfortunate, it's just a sign of another bad and lost year that's going on in the land of the Giants. So, it's unfortunate. It means that the team is not doing well, but it had to happen. It just had to. So here we are. Shane Bowen is out. All right. Now, Kafka named Charlie Bullen, the outside linebackers coach, as the interim defensive coordinator. We're going to talk about that right after this. Hey, Giant fans, the NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than at FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you missed the start of the game or you want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from whom will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team's making that late push. FanDuel offers a host of different ways to bet, not just on the NBA, but on the NFL, the NHL, and so much more. Whenever you have a hunch, they make it so easy, safe, and secure to get in on all the action, letting you bet the way you want to go. And right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So go on, head on over to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to Locked On Giants. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, and coming up this week, special day and time for the Giants squad show. Myself, Jay Berman, Mark Collins, former Giants cornerback. We're going to do the squad show at 4 o'clock on Wednesday, 4 p.m. Eastern. All right, since Thursday, our usual Thursday slot, Thursday is Thanksgiving this week. So we won't have that, the show for you on Thursday. But on Thursday, we will have for you Crossover Thursday. So we will take a look at the New England Patriots, who are next up on the Giants schedule. And then we'll just keep on rolling right along here on the Locked on Giants podcast. And we'll see if any other changes are coming down the pipe. Time's running out. I don't know how many more major changes they can make or will make, but we'll see as Mike Kafka's 7-game audition rolls right along. All right, so the Giants named Charlie Bullen, the outside linebackers coach, as the interim defensive coordinator. Now, before I go into anything, usually the coaching staff decisions are made by the head coach. So Kafka made sure to tell everybody in response to a question that the decision to promote Charlie Bullen to interim defensive coordinator was his. Now, I'll be honest with you. If you had asked me, before all this went down, who would succeed Bowen once he got, shown the door, I would have said either Marquand Manuel, who was the defensive backs coach / passing game coordinator, or Andre Patterson. Both of those guys have had previous experience as defensive coordinators in the NFL. Both of those guys are not the interim defensive coordinator. Now, I don't know if that's because they were offered the position and they said no, or, Kafka just went on the advice of general manager Joe Shane, who, by the way, has a prior working relationship with Charlie Bullen from their time in Miami. I think it was between 2012 and 2017, I believe. So I'm not sure exactly what happened or what discussions there were, or maybe Kafka just said, you know what, Charlie's doing the best job out of everybody. He's got the outside linebackers. Brian Burns is having a great year. Kayvon Thibodeau's not doing too badly. Abdul Carter, if we settle him down into a position, he'll be okay. I don't know what his thought process was. But here's what I'm concerned about with this pick. And I want to say that it is certainly possible that Charlie Bullen will do a great job. And I hope he does. Charlie's a great guy, works hard, is well respected. But I have concerns. All right. So besides the fact that there's that connection with Joe Shane, which has been a running theme with this organization and this particular regime, and that they always seem to go back to what they know and who they know, rather than thinking outside the box a little bit more often than what they should be. And that's a concern I have. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in the next segment, but that jumped to mind. But here's the thing. Charlie Bullen has never been a defensive coordinator or a defensive play caller in 18 years of coaching. So, that's almost like if the Giants came to me and said, hey, you be our defensive coordinator. I've never done it before. What qualifications do I have to do it? I mean, I'm a football writer, okay? I'm not qualified to be a play caller. Now, in speaking with Kafka this morning on his weekly call, he was asked about that. And I'm like, okay, so how's this going to work now? And basically, it's always been a collaborative process with developing the game plan. Don't get me wrong. So, even when Kafka was there, he had a collaborative effort with the other assistant coaches. But I kind of walked away from that call after hearing Kafka's answer, as if to say that the other coaches are going to help him, maybe a little bit more than, out of the ordinary. So, Marquand Manuel, who, like I said, has prior experience as a defensive coordinator, Andre Patterson with prior experience, that those guys are going to help him maybe a little bit more as he gets settled in the role. And, Kafka said, ultimately, Charlie's going to call the game. He's going to send all the calls to the middle linebacker, and we'll see how it goes from there. I get it that, coaching is a collaborative effort, but call me a little concerned here because, and I get it. Look, the season's over for the Giants. They're not going to go anywhere and whatnot. But I just found the whole decision-making process to promote Charlie Bullen curious. Because if you're Mike Kafka and you're auditioning for the job, to have that interim title removed from your title, why not go with experience? Why go with a guy who has never done it before? And Kafka, of course, said, "Oh, I have confidence in Charlie Bullen." Well, he also said yesterday, on Sunday after the game, he had confidence in Shane Bowen. All right, so words doesn't mean anything. Actions speak louder than words. So as I see it, the promotion of Charlie Bullen, I think, is a Band-Aid fix. You know, and again, he might turn into a really good defensive coordinator, but how much realistically can we expect him to fix? The personnel is what it is. Okay. You don't have Micah McFadden. Paulson Adebo's been banged up. Deontay Banks has been banged up. Now Demetrius Flanagan Fowles is banged up. They've had injuries in the secondary. Tyler Nubin missed the game. It's just a mess with the injuries. How much realistically can they change? Okay, so maybe on, I don't know, on first down, instead of playing this scheme, they're going to do something else. What I think Charlie Bullen is going to need to do in order to get off on the right foot with his tenure as an interim DC, simplify everything. I've been saying all season long, the Giants are doing too much on defense, and it is slowing them down. Simplify things and see if maybe the players can get back to flying around and making plays. We've seen them do it before when things have been simpler. And it just seems like, I don't know, under the previous regime, they just threw everything out there and hoped that something would work. So that would probably be the biggest change I would expect to see from a Charlie Bullen coordinated defense. But again, I'm going to say this. I'm a little, concerned that, it's going to be more of a collaborative effort. And collaboration is not a bad thing. But when you have too many cooks in the kitchen, sometimes that can be a bad thing. So obviously, we don't get to see the meetings. We don't get to sit in the meetings. So we won't know what is said and whatnot. But let's just hope for the best, because I've said it before. This defense has much better talent than what it has shown on the field. And Bowen just wasn't getting the most out of it, which is unfortunate. Can Bullen get more out of it? I don't know. I don't know how much, flexibility he's going to have. I don't know if Kafka's going to step in and say, okay, I like this better than that. I'm not sure how that dynamic's going to work. I do know on game day, Bullen's going to call the plays, and we just have to hope for the best. And if we don't get any kind of change, well, then we know what the problem is, right? All right, Giant fans, coming up next. So now what with the Giants? Moving forward, we'll talk about the general manager. We'll talk about the head coach search and a couple of other things right after this.
Today's show is brought to you by our friends over there at Peloton. Look, folks, it's time to break through the busiest time of the year with a brand new Peloton cross-training Tread Plus that's powered by Peloton IQ. It's Peloton's most elevated technology and equipment yet that gives you real-time guidance, and it gives you endless ways to move, whether you want to work out by yourself or if you want to work out with your favorite instructor, like my personal favorite, Alex Toussaint. He always gets me fired up to tackle the day. And the thing I like about Peloton, it helps me achieve more in less times. They have features that help you plan, stay motivated, track your progress, and Peloton IQ also provides personalized workout plans and recommendations. That's something that I use right now during the busiest time of the year covering the NFL. They plan my workouts for me based on my mood, my vibe, and also my favorite instructors. So make sure you check it out and use it, because it also helps you correct your form in real time, and it maximizes your reps. It counts your reps so that you can do it smarter, safer, and more efficient. Let yourself run, lift, flex, push, and go. Explore the new Peloton cross-training Tread Plus at onepeloton.com.
All right, Giant fans, welcome back to Locked On Giants. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, and All right, so we've had our second major news uh, piece, if you will, in the month. Been a very busy November, even though it hasn't been a very productive November for the Giants. Shane Bowen is out. That now is two major news moves, like I said. So, what about moving forward? All right, so some of the things moving forward, obviously, a big storyline this week. What's up with Jackson Dart? Is Jackson Dart going to clear the concussion protocol? And if he does, should he start? All right, I covered that yesterday, so I won't reiterate that on this show. I've covered that enough. But that's something that obviously everybody will be keeping an eye on. The other thing that I think everybody is curious about remains the head coaching search. Now, already different NFL insiders have put out, lists. I know I put out a list after Brian Dable was fired. I've said, you can't rule out just yet. I don't think you can rule out Kafka, who is auditioning for the role. This is an audition. It's not just, a temporary plug in, get us to the end of the season type of deal. So, something that I continue to remain concerned about with general manager Joe Shane leading this search. And yes, it does look like Joe Shane is going to continue to lead the search, despite the cries of some of you that he be fired. Joe Shane has had a habit of heavily leaning into his past. All right. Now, I get it. It's better to go with the devil you know than the devil you don't know. But it's not always the best way to go. Sometimes you got to think outside the box, go outside the box, and see if you can, get the best possible person, even if it's somebody you don't know. But my concern here is that Shane, who in no way, shape, or form, I believe, is off the hot seat, will go with somebody he knows. And will that somebody necessarily be the right call? Now, here's what's interesting. A name that has come up quite a lot in the Giants' search for a new head coach. And he's currently still employed, so who knows if he's even going to accept the interview or be granted permission to interview, assuming that he's still under contract for next year with his current team, is Lou Anarumo. Now, I talk about guys that he knows, Shane, that is. Lou Anarumo's son, Lewis, is a scout on the Giants. I am not saying that it means that Lou Anarumo is automatically going to be the guy, but you look at Joe Shane's history, all right? He knew Brian Dable. They brought down Bobby Johnson initially on the staff, a guy that they knew. Joe Shane has surrounded himself with guys that he's known, both coaching staff for the most part and in the front office. And if it doesn't work elsewhere, I'm not sure why the thought process is it's going to work, in a new location. We've also seen it with the players. Some of the players that he has brought in, Devin Singletary, Isaiah Hodgins, some of those moves work out and some of them don't. That would be my biggest concern about Joe Shane continuing in his job. Now, do I think Shane has done a horrible job with this roster? I mean, the record kind of speaks for itself. But, you look at, the injuries, you look at the coaching. I think you can make a strong argument that the coaching has not been up to snuff. But now that's being removed from the equation. And what happens moving forward is going to tell the real story of whether Joe Shane is really the right man to fix this roster or if the Giants are just spinning their wheels. And that kind of brings up, another point here. I am not a fan of the GM and the head coach being on different timelines. So, the Giants, assuming it's not going to be Kafka, they're going to hire a new head coach, probably give him a 4 or 5 year deal. Shane, I don't think ownership is going to give Shane a 4-year extension. He's got 1 more year on his current contract. So even if they, extend his deal so that he's on the same timeline as the new head coach, I don't know that that's going to happen. So it's back to where we were when Tom Coughlin resigned and ownership decided to stick with Jerry Reese as the GM. And that didn't work out very well, did it? So I don't know. I mean, I hope they know what they're doing. I hope that the decisions they've made work out for them. But I'm just so, numb to what has happened with this franchise. Just just when you think things can't get any worse, they do. And, here we are. We're in another lost season. And what's there to be excited about other than maybe Jackson Dart's return? And even there, you know, how much are they going to dial him back in terms of his running and the things he does that bring the excitement to the game? So there's just so much in terms of questions over this franchise that eventually I guess they'll be answered, but the true answers won't come until 2026 when they get on the field and we see the product and we see the results from the product that has been put together. And I'm hoping that it's a good one because look, I've said it before, folks. You guys and gals deserve better. It's been a long decade plus of poor football, and it's not easy. I'm old enough to remember, 2011, 2007. I talk about it all the time. I'm sure some of you, if not a lot of you, remember that as well. The Giants, hopefully, one day soon, get back to that kind of glory. So we'll see, guys. Hang in there. And of course, we will keep you up to date on all things New York Giants. All right, that's going to do it for this edition of Locked On Giants. As always, thank you so much for spending part of your day with us here. For your next listen, get a double dose of the Locked On NFL podcast. Tyler the Madman Rowland gives you a shot of espresso to start your football day, while Tony Wiggins takes you into the barbershop for the smoothest breakdowns to end the day. Find Locked On NFL on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. All right, Giant fans, I'll see you tomorrow. Make sure you check in for the squad show, the Giants squad show. That'll be at 4 o'clock Eastern on the YouTube channel. And of course, we'll have a new episode for you here on Locked On Giants tomorrow as well. So have a good one, everybody.